When I think of Project Zomboid, I'm brought back to 2014. I had the game on Steam, and to say it looked a little different back then compared to now would be actually pretty accurate. All I really remember from that time was playing with an old online friend who had a joy for being freakishly dominated by video game mechanics. I believe this is a flavor of masochist, Brandon, but while we had a few play sessions, limited largely by my fragmented preteen attention span, the one thing I remember the most in the game was when I met my end. Again and again. I was honestly just bad at the game, and I couldn't have put more than 10 hours into it. Project Zomboid stayed in my Steam library for the next 12 years, virtually untouched. That was until now.
Fuck, I got bit.
Unlike the other ancient zombie survival game that started around the same era, 7 Days to Die, the fan base of which has mostly died of old age waiting for the game to be good again, Project Zomboid has actually done quite the opposite. The fan base is still mostly in love, and if anything, the game might just be in a better state than it's ever been. Like many of the games I cover on my channel, I'm jumping into this one pretty blind, which is exactly why I spent dozens of hours combing through every single piece of lore that exists in the game files. Thank you to my friend CDP for helping export that stuff. I swear there's like 500 pages of lore. But while analyzing everything, I realized that Project Zomboid has revealed more about its virus and its story than you might realize even as a veteran, especially because some of the answers we have were only added in the last year. And that is precisely why I'm going to cover it all. Why is this the most realistic take on a zombie virus I've seen in games? How did it originate? And does humanity have any hope of surviving the future of this bleak world? Let's find out. Grab your baseball bats, your canned peaches, and your bottles of bleach, just in case, and let's get into the full story of Project Zomboid. The story of Project Zomboid is as much about zombies as it is about humanity's race to the bottom, because that race is what led to the zombie virus in the first place. To make that make sense, I need to tell you about a cow. Just hear me out. It's unclear where precisely this ancient deity of child sacrifice originated from, but consensus indicates the idea spread around in North Africa and the Middle East, and its name is Moloch. In the last few hundred years, this symbolic entity became synonymous with one of humanity's worst traits, our obsession with competition. Basically, the story with Moloch is that people would sacrifice their children to the deity in order to not face worse consequences if, for example, it didn't have enough sacrifices. But the parents failed to understand that the worst consequences were already inevitable in the long term by the act of parting ways with their children. Because with no kids, you have no future for your people. Humanity's race to the bottom appears symbolic of Moloch itself, where humanity is the one to blame for its own downfall. If you're already thinking about modern-day examples, well, you're one step ahead of me. The atomic bomb, the attention economy, the endless race of AI companies to grow as fast as possible. All of these in pursuit of one thing: to get ahead of the game, despite knowing full well what happens when all of their competitors are doing the exact same thing as them. It leads to nations producing countless atomic bombs, social media companies hooking and rotting as many people as they can, and of course, Moloch leads to your favorite corporate overlords exploding electricity costs for everyday people while making the cost of a single stick of RAM higher than your paycheck. But okay, what does this have to do with Project Zomboid's lore? Well, a lot actually. In America, we have an agency called the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and they do exactly what they say in real life. In Project Zomboid, they do the complete opposite, behind closed doors at least. While on the surface, the CDC in the game's lore likely maintains its public image, we know for a fact that for decades leading up to the outbreak, the CDC had been developing diseases in underground laboratories to use and sell as weapons. We know the CDC was doing this based on an interview with a whistleblower who worked there for decades prior. Unfortunately for the Project Zomboid universe, they don't have Leon Kennedy, so instead of the usually bittersweet ending of a Resident Evil game, in Project Zomboid, 95% of humanity is canonically dead within a month after the outbreak. But knowing how fast humanity dies isn't going to tell us how this all started, so let's rewind back to the CDC, and back to why I brought up Moloch in the first place. Why was the CDC secretly developing bioweapons? Well, because China was gonna do it first, of course. This is conjecture, by the way. There is no confirmation in the game lore as to their motives, but it's reasonable to assume that it was for competition. They couldn't stop themselves. After all, if another country made bioweapons first before them, said competitors would claim the market. The CDC couldn't let that happen. After all, America is the greatest, most powerful nation on Earth. Right? And by the way, this video was made 100% with no AI. Fuck you, Sam Altman. Also, Please subscribe. Sacrifices had to be made, even if that meant testing on none other than your own citizens. Who better to be your test subjects, especially if you could cover your tracks, right? Yeah, so that's exactly what they did. Before the zombie apocalypse, let's rewind back to 1989. The African country of Libya experiences an outbreak of a flesh-eating infection known as EVNA. It's not quite zombies, but based on a report found on a VHS tape, we know that this African outbreak had less than 50 cases. It was contained, presumably. This is relevant because 1 year later, all the way over in Raleigh, North Carolina, the EVNA infection appeared once again, this time infecting over 50 people. The VHS tape cuts off in the middle of the speaker, suggesting blame for the outbreak should be pointed at government laboratories in the Research Triangle. Speaking of which, in North Carolina, when people refer to the Triangle, they're talking about this Research Triangle with its 3 points being the cities of Durham, Chapel Hill, and Raleigh. I've actually been a guinea pig for multiple studies out of Chapel Hill, and it's a beautiful place. Anyway, after the Raleigh EVNA outbreak was contained, we cut to 2 years later in Varginha, Brazil. Yes, I know we're jumping all around the globe. We're almost done with the whiplash, I promise. So it was here in Brazil, 1992, February 12th, that there were reports of something strange. Meteors streaked across the sky, and many people reported a strange, rather disgusting smell in the air. These same people subsequently got dizzy, nauseous, and feverish. The symptoms of the residents eventually cleared up, but this was mere foreshadowing for the unsettling event humanity faced only 1 year later. Which takes us to 1993. Late in the month of June was where it all started for the Knox County area of Kentucky in the US of A. We're inclined to believe that since the meteor showers over Brazil the previous year, there have been more, including potentially meteor showers over Kentucky. Both sources from radio and TV broadcasts mention meteors, with one such radio transmission in July mentioning how one resident saw meteors pass overhead. But June may have also had meteors pass overhead as well because there were reports of a foul smell in the area. Perhaps just like that foul smell in Brazil only a year prior. Now, if you recall, the Brazilian residents experienced some symptoms, but those went away over time. Kentucky was going to face something different, because while the foul smell in Knox County should have generally subsided, another seemingly separate event cropped up, and the combination of this and the meteor's gas release may have been the precise circumstances that started the disaster. This connection is purely a theory though and not confirmed. Also, first of all, what event am I talking about? Well, remember the CDC and their testing on innocent American populations? Yeah, well, they're back to their old tricks. It is speculated that the military research facility in Game, found square in Knox County, was at least partially operated by CDC researchers. Inside the facility, if you go down far enough, you'll find decontamination chambers and a kennel room, suggesting animals, likely dogs, were being tested on. But why is this important? Well, let's play this day by day to understand the timeline for what is often referred to as the Knox Event. Wednesday, June 30th, 1993. Events that day don't seem all that out of the ordinary, aside from an incident involving a hunter who was reportedly attacked by a rabid whitetail stag. The hunter, John Nathan, said he never saw something like this before. But why would a deer attack someone, especially in this way? Perhaps a virus has breached containment, and not by accident, especially because of what happened just the next day. Thursday, July 1st. Knox County area has widespread telephone outages. It's confirmed 9 days later in a radio transmission that Knox telecommunication engineers were instructed by military to cut the phone lines deliberately. But the general public doesn't know about this yet. Friday, July 2nd. The FBI confirms from investigation Operation Centaur that some Kentucky legislators took bribes from private Kentucky-based companies to keep their mouths shut about toxic waste dumping and extortion that the companies were doing. Kentucky Governor Cal Fairweather was also accused of being aware of this. The phone lines are still down, marking the second day with no service. Saturday, July 3rd. A truck carrying hazardous waste was overturned on a local highway. Military quickly sealed it off from the public, and the Army says it is no danger to the public, despite environmental activists concerned from this event being one of many likely contributing to already higher rates of respiratory illness in the Knox area. Said respiratory illness further suggests a link to the meteors over Kentucky being the same as the meteors over Brazil the previous year. It should be pretty clear by now that whatever is going on, the CDC and military are trying to cut off Knox County from the rest of the world. And likely they know something about the infection spreading through animals, cases of which get only more frequent in just 24 hours. Sunday, July 4th. Americans can't stop themselves from celebrating their independence with huge turnout, despite the phones still being out. reports of an unusual illness in Muldra begin to make waves. A huge parade moves through Louisville with thousands attending, while there are reports of multiple rabid dog attacks. What happens when the respiratory illness in the air is combined with the rabid infection spreading from these animals to humans? Well, we're about to find out. Monday, July 5th. All hell has broken loose. The unidentified illness is reported to have infected dozens of Muldra residents. People are resorting to radio broadcasts for communication with the outside since, of course, phone lines are still down. And why wouldn't they be? They were cut for a reason, one which we'll understand fully very soon. On a side note, the fast food chain known as Spiffos, the mascot of which is the very same raccoon plastered on Project Zomboid's marketing, releases an in-game apology regarding an experimental secret sauce that was made over in Raleigh, North Carolina. This sauce somehow wound up in Kentucky. Is it possible that this sauce was the thing that caused the Evna breakout from a few years prior? Is the CDC aware of it? Is the Knox Event happening because of a set of several factors all combining to create the most deadly virus the world had seen thus far? These are questions to which we get so few answers. The same day, residents infected with the so-called unknown illness experience symptoms like severe nausea and fever. Doctors are overwhelmed with cases. Infrastructure collapses. All the while, the US military block off roads and highways leading in and out of the Knox County area. July 6th. On this Tuesday morning, hundreds of military personnel arrive in the Knox area, setting up huge fences blocking off Knox County from the rest of Kentucky, while keeping the gigantic city of Louisville specifically isolated from the rest of the county. The military refuse to explain what's happening, most soldiers appearing apologetic or equally as confused. After all, they're simply following orders. It's not the ones on the front lines who are to blame, it's those who are giving the orders from the top. Speaking of which, if you're wondering who's in charge of all these military personnel now in the area, the ones quarantining off Knox County and Louisville, well, that would be none other than General John McCrew. His inaction and outright ignorance in the face of the deadliest virus humanity had ever faced was about to speak volumes, because as much as he was setting up fences, this really wasn't going to do shit. The next day, on July 7th at 11 p.m., an unusually bright meteor shower is spotted over Kentucky. Does this mark the beginning of the end? Well, first, let's pause and just recap what all has happened so far. The Project Zomboid lore sets up a world really quite identical to our own as far as history goes. The one main difference is that the American agency, the CDC, the one responsible for keeping people safe from diseases, is, ironically, manufacturing them in the game's universe. They make bioweapons, most likely to outcompete their enemies and continue to strive for deadlier and more potent products to sell off, all the while testing these bioweapons on populations of Americans. While the CDC didn't seem to create every single circumstance that led to what became the zombie virus, it is implied that the CDC did create whatever has infected the dogs and other animals in Knox County. A strange meteor event over Brazil implies that whatever came from space gave off some kind of particle that, when breathed in by humans, would give them symptoms of nausea, respiratory illness, and fever. You combine all of these strange occurrences with the niche reports of the American fast food chain Spiffos and their strange secret sauce that was not supposed to get out, and suddenly we've got 3 or 4 different factors that are all implying that they lead to humans getting sick in different ways. And all of this culminated in Kentucky. The CDC's hyperfixation in 1993, the year we start the game itself. The month of July was when it all boiled over. Reports of rabid animals, namely dogs, biting humans, combined with a whole-ass truck getting overturned, spilling toxic waste. I mean, goddamn, man, how many variables are you fuckers going to combine? And the cherry on top? A meteor shower right over Kentucky, just like the one over Brazil from years prior. Whatever was about to happen is not something we can feasibly pin on any single factor, but we know damn well that humanity's foolishness was the straw that broke the camel's back. What happens next is simple. This is the story of how you died. Before I can explain the player's events, I want you to understand how the lore in Project Zomboid actually works. The game canonically begins on July 9th, which is the point by which people inside the Knox County exclusion zone have begun to reanimate as zombies. But this is where some cracks start to show in the continuity of the game when compared to the lore. In the game, you can choose where to spawn your freshly made character in one of 4 major cities, but the zombies are already in significantly higher rates than they would be by this point in the lore. In fact, you can't even find a single human survivor, despite it being only the start of the first major wave of what we consider to be human zombies. Another example of continuity mismatch shows by, despite Louisville still having a functional checkpoint between it and the rest of Knox County, if you go there in-game, literally on the same day you spawn, July 9th, you'll find the checkpoint has fallen. It's overrun. And yet, this event hasn't even happened yet in the lore. These continuity mismatches aside, the main way you find lore in the game is through one of three primary possibilities. Number one, you find newspapers around the game world, which can include old newspapers all the way up to newspapers being written basically in real time with the game's date. How these July 10th, 11th, and so on newspapers are making it into the exclusion zone when some of these papers are literally written outside of the zone isn't clear. Another continuity issue, I suppose? The second main way you get lore is from radio broadcasts, which are coded in the game to be scheduled to play on specific frequencies at specific times on specific days. With how many radio broadcasts there end up being in the game, actually getting them all to play in a single playthrough would be pretty tough, though the specific times they play are actually just time ranges. For example, one might play on July 10th between 000 and 3:30. After that, if you miss that window, you're not going to hear that exact same broadcast ever again, unless it's a deliberately repeating one. That said, you don't actually hear the broadcasts. It's text that you're reading. And this is the same with the third main way of getting lore, which is through the TV broadcasts. They function just like the radios, but it's just with TVs instead. But okay, what do these mediums actually mean for the substance of the story? Well, to put it simply, the newspapers generally document the progression of the virus in Knox County, as well as world events, and they highlight, much like the rest of the lore, the differing ways in which news is covered by independent versus biased parties. On the other hand, most of the TV broadcasts are pretty meaningless and just have like old shows playing while the world ends, with a few survivor outliers like this one group who takes over a TV station. The radio broadcasts are where things get really interesting though, because of all the lore, this is where the juicy stuff can be found. Not to diss the newspapers. While there are dozens of biased radio stations that usually just repeat the same bullshit propaganda about how everything is fine and the military has the whole virus situation under control, even by the point where it's clearly the point of no return, on the other hand, some of the radio broadcasts highlight the brutal stories that everyday people have to share, before often they meet their end. And then you've got the Upper South Radio, which is perhaps the most important radio station in the entire game for what we learn when we're listening in to one particular host. On July 10th, Saturday, we get this radio transmission from the Upper South Radio, or USR, with one such host named Don Beverage, broadcasting all the way from the edge of the Mojave Desert, way out west, quite far from Kentucky for those of you who don't know American geography. Don has a call-in on the show who claims to know something about the phone lines over in Knox County. What you're about to hear is an actual voice actor I hired to bring this story to life.
Good evening from the edge of the Mojave. I'm Don Beverage, and you're listening to Sea to Shining Sea. Tonight I have Sarah from Kentucky on the line. You there, Sarah?
Hi, Don. Sure am. Love your show.
Oh, thank you. So you worked for Kentucky's Knox Telecommunications?
Yes, Don. Until they fired me for refusing to keep quiet.
Keep quiet about what, Sarah?
My friend told me they got the engineers to cut the phone lines.
That's quite the story, Sarah. Thanks for calling.
In another USR Don Beverage broadcast the next day, a different caller claims that in the town of West Point, another major city in the exclusion zone, she saw army personnel going around injecting people and spraying stuff in the air. She claims it's a chemical that makes people collapse, and when they come back, they're not themselves. Whether this lady is just going insane or is genuinely seeing this happen is unclear. Later that day, on a separate radio broadcast, the World Health Organization advises all airports internationally to ground flights in case the virus spreads outside of Kentucky. The next day, July 12th, national leaders like the president as well as the military and the CDC all downplay the Knox situation, damage controlling the severity of the virus. And speaking of said virus, it's also on this day that we get what is easily the most jaw-dropping radio transmission in the entire game. Let's hear what Don Beverage's latest caller has to say.
Good evening from the edge of the Mojave. I'm Don Beverage, and you're listening to Sea to Shining Sea. Tonight I've got Professor Oliver Black, former employee of the CDC, on the line. Professor, tell us what you know about this virus.
Hi, Don. I was head of the Intentional Release Virality Department at the CDC for 18 years. We invented new and deadly viruses for use in warfare. The CDC has underground labs all over the country where things like this are made.
So you're suggesting this virus originated from one of these bases?
Almost certainly. Specifically, it looks like it was a strain of Juniper 17.
I never heard of that. Are you pulling my leg?
No, Don, this is too serious. It's likely an experiment, a large-scale live exercise that will cause many deaths, and it will all be covered up. That's why I left the CDC, became a man of God.
If Professor Oliver Black is to be believed, then this right here is the smoking gun, the evidence you were likely looking for since the beginning of this video. This is the proof that the CDC not only are a ruthless agency seeking to create bioweapons, but that whatever this Juniper 17 strain is, may very well have combined with the other environmental variables in Knox County to create the end of humanity. And what can any one individual do? After all, the Louisville mayor cares so little about the danger of the virus that on July 13th, he says, "We remain open." That same day, newspapers report on General John McCrew, the guy responsible for the Knox containment, claiming that there is no need for further panic, despite knowing full well that shit is fucked. Oh yeah, and the cherry on top, newspapers release a photograph taken of a West Point zombie. Now the whole world is exposed to what they're about to find face to face for themselves in only a few short days. On July 14th, Don Beverage has another call-in from an Arkansas man, this time about an unsettlingly deep hole in his backyard. The man claims that after he reported it, some geologists secured the area and gave him money to quickly move to New Zealand. On July 16th, our host gets another call-in, this time from a desperate mother of two who had just escaped Louisville. Her youngest is likely infected, and she begs for help as Dawn can do nothing but listen. By the next day, the infection has spread all the way out to Mr. Beverage in the Mojave. His normally upbeat show begins to sound hopeless.
Don Beverage, still at the edge of the Mojave. It's everywhere now. My wife Camille, she has the fever. We've both been isolating, haven't seen each other or anyone else for days. It doesn't matter. The phone lines are down. I've got enough food and water here. But what's the point? Why are we trying to survive?
July 17th, the radio show host shares what he found after checking on his wife.
Don Beverage, I took a big risk. I went back to see my wife. She saw me, or at least she turned to me. Staring through the window with these blank eyes, she started clawing at the glass. God save us.
In his last transmission, the man shares valuable information.
It looks like I'm immune, at least from the flu that spreads through the air. I know this because 4 soldiers came to see me, said they're evacuating from Nellis because it's too close to Vegas. They laid Camille to rest for me. The power and transmitters and so on are going to fail soon. Don't expect to hear me east of Nevada unless you've got a powerful radio. But it's better than nothing. I've got a long helicopter ride now. I don't know what's waiting for me on the other side. I've been Don Beverage. Look out for each other, America.
While that concludes our Western radio show host's story, you're probably still wondering, what the hell exactly happened in Kentucky? How did the virus actually get out? It was quarantined after all, right? Well, not exactly. Let's rewind back to July 9th. You start the game after creating your character. Despite no human NPCs, there are still survivors, including journalists alive in the area, reporting and trying to survive amidst the ever-growing zombie population. And of course, the rest of the world is eagerly awaiting more information about the ever-concerning Knox virus. As you loot, craft, and fight your way through the place you may have once called home, the world is responding in real time. An emergency broadcast repeats all day on Friday, giving advice for how not to die from the infection. It's unclear whether that advice is all that helpful to you, though. You're probably just trying to figure out how to meet up with your friends.
Oh my god. It's so human. Oh.
2 days into your survival, on July 11th, airlines are reportedly heeding the World Health Organization's advice to ground all flights, excluding military and medical emergencies. And the Knox virus is becoming rather well known among Kentucky residents and globally. Some residents from inside Knox County have made it over the Ohio River, spreading the virus outside the exclusion zone. On the 12th, a civilian uses an amateur band shortwave to send a clear message from inside the zone. They say, "You're being lied to." They go on to explain the virus and how there are snipers outside the zone ready to shoot anyone, infected or not, if they try to leave. Though, if you're anything like me, again, you're not even thinking of leaving because you just got bit and you realize it's probably best to go for a little walk with your friends to the middle of a field. They keep telling me to look at the flowers. I don't know what's so interesting about the flower.
Okay. Damn. Oh my god.
July 13th, the CDC downplays the virus, saying it is spread only through fluid contact. The US president leaves Washington, D.C., fleeing outside the country, claiming he has private family matters. Right. Around the world, leaders are closing off their borders, quarantining their cities out of fear. On July 14th, a woman calls in to Knox Talk Radio using a car phone, claiming there are hundreds, thousands of zombies who appear just outside the perimeter fence between Louisville and the rest of the zone. They're trying to get into the city, and the fence is not going to hold them for long. LBMW reporter Jackie J simply says to get out of Louisville. in a broadcast on the 15th. She later claims something critical to understand about the virus. It's airborne. By the 16th, globally news spreads that the Knox virus is not exclusively translated through fluids like the CDC had claimed. It is, in fact, airborne, and rumors spread that symptoms have shown up in the UK and Africa. But let's reiterate this detail about it being airborne. I want to make it crystal clear here what that entails. In Project Zomboid, it's theorized that roughly 95% of humanity is vulnerable to the airborne variant. Being vulnerable to it doesn't simply mean it lives in their bodies, dormant like some Walking Dead shit. The virus actively begins to kill them, with symptoms of severe nausea, hallucinations, and fever, even respiratory symptoms too, until eventually they die. And after they die, they come back and you know the rest. But think about that, only 5% of people left, estimated, are immune to the airborne variant. Those 5% can still turn into zombies, but only by fluid contact like getting scratched or bitten. These facts alone make this virus one of the most foreboding and horrifying I've seen in zombie media. You basically have a 1 in 20 chance to not get infected just for breathing air. Basically, everyone is fucking cooked. Except, not quite. Because as much as the broadcasts between July 17th and beyond get more and more depressing, hopeless, and quiet, there is one that stands out above all else. And in fact, it's not just one, it had been a message sent out multiple times amidst the chaos. A message of hope. Every broadcast in the game ends by July 20th, mostly because the devs can't just write infinite lore, but also because most of the people in the world are zombies by then. Nonetheless, like I said, amidst the chaos of the previous few weeks, you can occasionally find a civilian broadcasting out of Nashville, Tennessee from an airport base that's eventually taken over and fortified. Over time, survivors come and go, but these broadcasts are basically coming from the same general area. The base is taken over by zombies eventually, but then it's cleared out and fortified once more by a different group of survivors from before, and this is where we get the last broadcast in the entire game, which gives us a rare piece of hope in a sea of static.
This is Zach broadcasting. 3 days ago, we took over its fortification at the Air National Guard base. It's close to Nashville, right by the airport. I'm gonna broadcast every night. The immune who were here got run out of town. The dead got to them. We've rebuilt their defenses, and we need you. We've got the supplies, we just need the people. You don't have to be hungry anymore. Friendlies only.
We only hear from Zach once, but this being the last broadcast in the game is deliberate in my opinion. I personally think they're hinting at the Nashville settlement potentially being an endgame goal, or perhaps a DLC or future update. I guess we're gonna find out in, another 13 years. The big takeaway from Project Zomboid and its fascinatingly grounded zombie virus is that the devs do not want us to know the exact cause. Whether it was toxic waste dumping, secret animal testing leading to rabid cross-species infection, or it was the gas released from meteors, or Spiffo's special fucking sauce, or some crazy bacteria released from deep under the ground, clearly there are a lot of variables, some of which being purely alleged by random Americans. All we know for sure is that the Knox event was deliberately contained and deliberately an experiment. But it's hard to believe that the experiment was intended to go as far as destroying most of humanity. Sure, the CDC fucking sucks in this universe, but for what reason would they want to destroy the world? With all the evidence, the best interpretation I have is that the CDC released their Juniper 17 virus on the Knox County population around the same exact time that the other variables, when combined with the virus, led to a mutation so infectious and deadly that it reanimated the dead with one goal in mind: to spread. But where's the story going to go from here? The virus eventually spreads to the entire world, yet there's at least a few million people left, presumably, those immune to the airborne virus. Humanity has a chance, but judging by how hard the game is, holy fuck, that is a very small chance.
I'm dead.
Wait, you died?
Yeah, Alec. Don't move.
Alec.
Shot my zombie. Do you not have any kind of flashlight at all? Bro, how are you doing this? John Wick over here.
Uh-oh. Fuck! I can see!
Oh, I hear them all. I'm dead.
There are a lot of theories about this game's lore. After all, everyone wants to know, where did the virus actually come from, guys? Who's this mysterious V dude who's trying to do an inside job at the military research facility? And what about the weird bottomless hole that one guy found in his backyard, conveniently a year before the Knox event, which is exactly when the meteor event happened over Brazil? It's a lot of questions, and unfortunately, I couldn't really cover them all in this video. While Project Zomboid has near infinite replayability, especially considering the size of the modding community, the lore still gives us so many unknowns, and only grows as fast as the game's writers are making it. There are so many questions I have. What happens to Don Beverage? Why are their survivors continuously bringing up this Nashville settlement? Will there be an ending to the game? Any kind of story goals or actual things to build towards? I see much of this never happening unless the game actually adds human NPCs. I guess we'll see. For most of the characters in the lore, we get to hear the stories of how they died. But for others, we have much more to know. Each of our own characters will meet their end one day too. It's just a matter of when. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys next time.